The rescue of the 5 children should have ended the war, but the fathers of the retrieval force had seen too much and learned too much to simply walk away. The research facility in the Terminus Nebula had contained files and records that revealed the true scope of Vorthan crimes against other species. For over 50 years, the Vorthan Empire had been kidnapping children from colonies throughout the galaxy. They used them in psychological experiments, biological research, and weapons testing. The 5 human children were just the most recent victims in a program that had destroyed thousands of young lives. The evidence was overwhelming and horrifying. Children from peaceful farming colonies had been taken to study their reactions to fear and pain. Young ones from trading stations had been used to test new drugs and surgical procedures. Even infants had been stolen from their parents to examine how different species developed under stress. The 5 fathers looked at this evidence and realized that their war had become something much larger than a rescue mission. They were no longer fighting just to save their own children. They were fighting to stop monsters who had been preying on the innocent for decades. Commander Thek 9 made one final attempt at negotiation, sending messages to every human government and military authority he could identify. He offered massive reparations, territorial concessions, and formal apologies in exchange for an end to the hostilities. The Vorthan Empire was willing to do almost anything to stop the destruction. The response came not from any official human authority, but from Dong-Yun Kim. Speaking for all 5 fathers and the thousands who had joined their cause, his message was broadcast throughout the galaxy so that every species would understand humanity's position. He explained in words that would be remembered throughout galactic history that some crimes could not be forgiven, some injuries could not be healed by negotiation, and some enemies had to be completely destroyed to ensure they could never threaten anyone's children again. The retrieval force had evolved from a desperate rescue mission into something approaching a moral crusade. Volunteers from dozens of other species joined the human fleet as word spread about the evidence found in the research facility. Parents throughout the galaxy understood what the 5 fathers were fighting for. Final battle took place in orbit around the Vorthan homeworld, where the last remnants of their military made a desperate stand. The Vorthan High Command had recalled every ship and soldier they could find for this ultimate defense of their civilization. The engagement lasted 3 days and became known as the Battle of Final Justice. Human forces supported by alien allies from species that had suffered under Vorthan oppression surrounded the homeworld and demanded unconditional surrender. The Vorthan fleet fought with the courage of the doomed, but they were outnumbered and outfought by enemies who had learned to use Vorthan technology against them. Human engineers had reverse-engineered captured equipment and improved upon it, creating weapons that were superior to anything the Vorthans? Posset Jawan commanded the assault from his flagship, watching as Vorthan ships were systematically destroyed by forces that had grown far beyond anything he had originally imagined. The fleet now numbered in the thousands of vessels crewed by volunteers who had come from across the galaxy. The orbital bombardment of Vorthan military installations was precise and devastating. Human gunners had no interest in harming civilian populations, but they were determined to eliminate every trace of the Empire's military capability. The message was clear: the Vorthan war machine would never threaten children again. When the last Vorthan warship surrendered, the terms of defeat were dictated by the retrieval force rather than by any government or diplomatic authority. The Vorthan Empire would be dissolved, its colonies granted independence, and its leaders put on trial for crimes against the young of multiple species. The trials that followed became a galactic sensation as the full extent of Vorthan crimes was revealed to the public. Witnesses from dozens of species testified about children who had been stolen and experimented upon. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Vorthan citizens demanded justice. Research Director Vec 7 and his team of scientists were executed for their crimes against children. The executions were carried out by volunteers from the species whose young had suffered in Vorthan laboratories. Justice was swift and final. Commander Vec 9 spent his remaining years in a prison facility run by former victims of Vorthan experiments. He died alone and forgotten, a symbol of what happened to those who threatened the innocent. The 5 children, meanwhile, were slowly recovering from their ordeal aboard medical ships that Kyungmin had converted into floating hospitals. They had been through experiences that would mark them for life, but they had also witnessed something remarkable about their species and their families. Minho had seen his father led Marines through the poisonous clouds of the Terminus Nebula, risking everything to save him. Nayeon had watched her father fight his way through an alien fortress to reach her cell. Hyunsu and Jiwon had been rescued by soldiers who cared more about their safety than their own lives. Sumin had been saved by a father who had abandoned his peaceful nature to become a warrior in her defense. All 5 children understood that they were part of something larger and more powerful than any individual family. They had seen what happened when humanity's protective instincts were fully aroused. The Galactic Council, faced with the reality of what humans were capable of when their young were threatened, quickly moved to establish new protocols for dealing with Earth's expanding civilization. The retrieval incident, as it came to be known in diplomatic circles, became required study for anyone dealing with human affairs. The lesson was simple and terrifying. There were some lines that should never be crossed, some bonds that should never be tested, and some species whose protective instincts ran so deep that threatening their young was essentially a declaration of total war. Other alien empires that had been considering aggressive actions against human colonies quietly abandoned their plans. The galaxy had learned that humanity would respond to threats against their children with overwhelming force, regardless of the cost to themselves. Years later, when the 5 children had grown into adults with children of their own, they would tell their sons and daughters about the time their grandfathers went to war against an empire and won. The story became the Terminus Nebula was a place where ships went to die. The dense clouds of poisonous gas blocked all sensors and communications, while gravitational fields, strong enough to crush metal, pulled unwary vessels into spinning death traps. Every military expert in the galaxy agreed that attacking anything hidden in the nebula was impossible. The retrieval force did not care about expert opinions. The Vorthen research facility deep inside the nebula was protected by more than just its location. Elite troops from the Vorthen Imperial Guard defended the installation along with experimental weapons that had never been tested in real combat. The facility was designed to be completely impregnable. Dongani led the first assault wave using navigation data that Woojin had purchased from smugglers, pirates, and anyone else who had ever successfully entered the nebula. His Marines followed him in small, fast ships that could maneuver through the gravitational fields, accepting horrific casualty rates. In exchange for the element of surprise, the nebula tried to kill them before the Vorthens got the chance. Ships were crushed by gravity, wells torn apart by radiation storms, and lost forever in the swirling clouds of gas. Dong-yoon watched good soldiers die horrible deaths, but he never slowed down because his son was somewhere in that facility. The Marines who survived the journey through the nebula were changed by the experience. They had looked death in the face and kept going because 5 children needed them. Their training and discipline had been replaced by something primal and unstoppably. Jahuan commanded the main assault force, bringing heavy weapons to bear on the facility's outer defenses. His ships emerged from the nebula clouds like ghosts materializing from another dimension. The Vorthen defenders had expected some kind of attack, but nothing had prepared them for the fury of human parents. The battle for the facility began with an orbital bombardment that lit up the nebula. Like a new star, Jawan's gunners fired everything they had at the defensive installations, while human fighters engaged Vorthen interceptors in dogfights that twisted through the gas clouds. The facility's shields held against the bombardment, but cracks began to appear in the defensive perimeter. Human ships pressed their attacks with suicidal determination, ramming Vorthen vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. The disciplined Vorthen formation began to break apart under pressure. Sungjin's special operations teams used the chaos of the main battle to infiltrate the research complex itself. They moved through the facility's ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels like deadly shadows. Their mission was simple: find the 5 children and eliminate anyone who tried to stop them. The infiltration teams had been trained for this specific operation for weeks. They knew the facility's layout better than most of the people who worked there. They moved with mechanical precision toward their objectives, leaving a trail of dead Vorthen guards behind them. The research facility had never been designed to withstand a direct military assault. The scientists and administrators had always assumed that the nebula itself would protect them from any attack. They were unprepared for enemies who would risk everything to reach them. Research Director Vex 7 tried to evacuate the most important experimental subjects, including the 5 human children, but Wojan's intelligence network had anticipated this. The evacuation routes were blocked by human forces who had been waiting in ambush for hours. The facility's internal defenses activated, automatically sealing blast doors and releasing security robots to fight the human intruders. But Kyungmin's technical teams had spent months developing countermeasures for Vorthan technology. The robots were neutralized and the blast doors were blown open. Dongyin found his son Minho in a psychological testing chamber where the boy was strapped to a chair with wires attached to his head. The 12-year-old had been subjected to hours of stress testing designed to break his spirit, but his eyes still showed defiance when his father burst through the door. The sight of his son being tortured by alien scientists triggered something savage in Dongyun. He killed everyone in the room with his bare hands, then carefully freed Minho from the testing equipment. The boy was weak and traumatized but alive, and that was all that mattered. As Yuan discovered his daughter Neiyan in an isolation cell where she had been kept alone for weeks. The 7-year-old girl had drawn pictures on the walls with her own blood because the aliens had not given her anything else to use. The images showed her family and her home and her hope that someone would come for her. When Neiyan saw her father, she did not cry or show weakness. Instead, she stood up straight and said she had known he would find her. The reunion lasted only seconds before Jawan swept her up and carried her toward the extraction point. Fighting through Vorthan soldiers who tried to stop them, Sungjin found his son Hyunsu and his friend Jiwon in adjacent observation cells where they had been forced to watch each other suffer. The 2 boys had supported each other through their ordeal, developing a bond that would last for the rest of their lives. The rescue of Hyunsu and Jiwon required fighting through 3 levels of security as Vorthan guards tried desperately to prevent the children from being taken. Sunjin's team eliminated every enemy they encountered, leaving no one alive who had participated in tormenting the boys. Kyungmin discovered his daughter Somin in a medical laboratory, where she was connected to monitoring equipment that tracked her vital signs. While she was subjected to various stimuli, the 8-year-old girl had been drugged to keep her compliant, but she recognized her father immediately. The sight of his daughter being used as a laboratory specimen broke something inside Kyungmin that had never been broken before. The gentle scientist who had always solved problems through patience and research became something terrible and primal. His screams of rage echoed through the facility as he destroyed every piece of equipment he could find. Wojin located his son Jiwon at the same time as Sungjun found Hyunsu. The 2 boys had been kept together as part of an experiment in human social bonding under stress. Their friendship had helped them survive the ordeal, but both children showed signs of trauma that would take years to heal. The extraction of all 5 children required a fighting withdrawal through a facility that was collapsing under the continued orbital bombardment. Human teams carried the children through corridors filled with smoke and debris, while Vorthan forces made desperate attempts to stop them. The children were alive but damaged by their weeks in captivity. Minho tried to act strong for the others, but he flinched at sudden noises. Neiyan clung to her father and would not let go. Hyunsu and Jiwon stayed close together, drawing strength from their friendship. Somin was quiet and withdrawn, showing the psychological effects of her treatment. The evacuation ships fought their way out of the nebula while the research facility burned behind them. The Vorthan defenders who survived the assault were left stranded in the poisonous clouds with no way to call for help or escape. The rescue mission was successful, but the cost had been enormous. Hundreds of human volunteers had died in the nebula, and many more had been wounded or traumatized by what they had seen. The facility contained evidence of experiments on children from dozens of species, turning what had begun as a rescue mission into something much larger. As the extraction fleet headed for safe space, the 5 fathers held their children and tried to process what they had accomplished. They had declared war on an interstellar empire, and one they had penetrated an impregnable fortress and rescued their young. They had proven that human parents would go to any length to protect their children, but the war was not over. The Vorthan Empire still existed, and there were other facilities where children were being tortured in the name of science. The retrieval force had tasted victory, and they wanted more than just their own. Children back the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's protective instincts, once aroused, could not be easily satisfied. The final reckoning was yet to come. The Vorthan High Command finally understood how badly they had miscalculated when human forces attacked their primary naval base at Vorthan Prime. The base was supposed to be impossible to assault. It was protected by orbital defense platforms, a full fleet of their most advanced warships and defensive systems that had never been tested in real combat. Attack should never have succeeded, but the humans had spent weeks studying every detail of the base's defenses. They used tactics that no civilized military would consider acceptable, sending wave after wave of ships against the orbital platforms while accepting casualties that would have broken any normal force. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Vorthan Third Fleet. More importantly for the retrieval force, they captured Admiral Keth 12, the highest-ranking Vorthan officer outside the Imperial Council. The admiral was taken alive and brought aboard Gilvan's command ship for interrogation. The methods used to question Admiral Keth 12 would have violated every treaty that Earth had ever signed. The Five Fathers no longer cared about such things. They needed information about their children, and they would use any means necessary to get it. The admiral tried to resist, but human determination proved stronger than Vorthan training under interrogation that lasted 4 days. Admiral Keth 12 finally revealed what the humans desperately needed to know. The 5 children were being held at a research facility hidden in the Terminus Nebula, where Vorthan scientists were studying their psychological responses to separation and fear. The revelation that their children were being used as experimental subjects hit the Five Fathers like physical blows. Dongyun had to be restrained from killing the admiral with his bare hands. Jaewon locked himself in his quarters for 6 hours and emerged with eyes that had gone completely cold. Sung Jin gathered his special forces teams and began planning an assault that would have been considered impossible under normal circumstances. Woojin activated every intelligence asset he had developed to gather information about the Nebula facility. Kyungmin started working on technologies that could function in the chaotic environment of the nebula. The restraint that the retrieval force had sometimes shown, the mercy they had occasionally granted, the diplomatic solutions they had briefly considered, all evaporated in an instant. What remained was pure focused hatred backed by increasingly sophisticated military capabilities. Commander Thek 9 received reports about the interrogation of Admiral Keth 12 and realized that the situation had moved beyond his ability to control. The humans now knew where their children were being held, and nothing would stop them from attempting a rescue. The research facility in the Terminus Nebula would soon become the target of the most desperate military operation in galactic history. The facility was commanded by Research Director Vex 7, who had been conducting experiments on children from various species for over 10 years. The human subjects were particularly interesting because of their strong emotional bonds and their psychological resilience. Vex 7 believed his work was contributing to important scientific knowledge. The 5 children had been separated and placed in different parts of the facility so that their reactions could be studied individually. Minho was subjected to stress tests designed to measure human leadership capabilities under pressure. Neo was placed in isolation to study the effects of separation. Anxiety on young Himanshimonsu and Jiwon were kept in adjacent cells where they could see but not reach each other. The researchers wanted to observe how human friendship bonds affected behavior under stress. Soman was given art supplies and encouraged to draw pictures that revealed her psychological state. All 5 children showed remarkable resistance to the psychological manipulation. Despite weeks of captivity and constant testing, they maintained their hope that their parents would come for them. They supported each other through their shared ordeal and refused to give the researchers the broken subjects they expected. The children did not know about the war that was being fought across Vorthan space to rescue them. They did not understand that thousands of humans had volunteered to risk their lives for 5 young people. They had never met. All they knew was that they had to stay strong and wait for help to arrive. The Vorthan Empire was crumbling under the sustained assault by the retrieval force. Colony after colony was evacuated as human forces swept through Vorthan. Territory military units that had never known defeat were being destroyed by enemies who fought with supernatural determination. The economic collapse was accelerating as the war disrupted trade routes and industrial production. The Vorthan government was spending enormous resources trying to defend against human attacks while also attempting to negotiate some kind of peace agreement. But the Five Fathers were no longer interested in negotiation. They had seen the evidence of what was being done. To their children and to other species, the research facility contained records of experiments on dozens of children over many years. The humans had discovered that they were fighting not just kidnappers but monstrous diplomatic attempts by neutral species to mediate the conflict were rejected by the retrieval force. There was no government authority that could speak for the human forces and no political solution that would satisfy them. They wanted their children back and they wanted everyone responsible for the experiments to be punished. The psychological impact on Vorthan society was devastating. Their empire had been built on the belief that they were the most advanced and powerful species in their region. The humans had shattered that belief by refusing to acknowledge Vorthan's superiority. Citizens began to question their government's policies for the first time in centuries. News of the experiments on children spread despite attempts at censorship. Many Vorthans were horrified to learn what their military had been doing, and their names some even began providing intelligence to human forces. The Five Fathers met again on Jawan's command ship to plan the final assault on the research facility. Each of them had changed during the weeks of warfare. Dongyun had become grimmer and more focused on destruction. Jawan had developed a cold efficiency that frightened even his own officer Sungjun's. Special forces training had merged with parental fury to create something that was barely human anymore. Wujin had built an intelligence network that operated outside all moral constraints. Kyungmin had abandoned his peaceful scientific work to develop weapons that could kill aliens more effectively. They studied the intelligence about the Terminus Nebula facility and planned an operation that would either succeed completely or result in the deaths of everyone involved. There was no middle ground and no backup plan. They would get their children back or die trying. The facility was protected not just by its location in the dangerous nebula but by elite Vorthan troops and experimental defensive systems that had never been used in combat. The assault would require everything the retrieval force had learned about fighting Vorthans plus new tactics designed specifically for this mission. As the planning continued, more volunteers arrived to join the final battle. Veterans who had been fighting across Vorthan space came to participate in what they knew would be the most important engagement of the war. Civilian volunteers who had never seen combat before insisted on being included. The retrieval force had grown from 5 desperate fathers into an army of thousands united by their commitment to bringing the children home. The galaxy watched in fascination and horror as humanity prepared for a battle that would determine whether parental love was stronger than alien technology. The price of resistance had been paid in Vorthan blood and treasure, but the final reckoning was still to come. The Vorthan Empire had controlled 17 star systems for over 200 years. They had the most advanced technology in this part of the galaxy, and their military had never lost a war. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, and their tactics were perfect. Commander Thek-9 was confident that even if humans tried to rescue their children, it would be easy to defeat them. The first Vorthan outpost to see the retrieval force was a listening station on the edge of their territory. The Vorthan soldiers there were used to quiet duty, watching for smugglers and pirates. Nothing interesting ever happened at their remote station until the day human ships appeared without warning. The attack came like lightning from a clear sky. One moment, the Vorthan sensors showed empty space, and the next moment, dozens of human ships were firing weapons and demanding information about the captured children. The Vorthan commander tried to follow standard military procedure and contact his superiors, but the humans gave him no time. Human soldiers boarded the listening station and moved through it like they owned the place. They were not interested in taking prisoners or following rules of war. They wanted only one thing to know: where 5 human children were being held. When the Vorthan soldiers said they had no information, the humans became even more aggressive. The station's final message to Vorthan command was confused and frightening. The human attackers seemed to care nothing about their own safety as long as they could get answers about the children. They fought with an intensity that shocked the Vorthan defenders, who had expected civilized warfare. Within 1 week, 7 Vorthan installations had been attacked by human forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The humans did not follow any logical pattern that Vorthan military experts could understand. Sometimes they wanted intelligence, sometimes they destroyed equipment, and sometimes they simply eliminated anyone who might know about the children. The retrieval force had abandoned every rule that civilized species followed in warfare. They operated with the single-minded focus of predators hunting their prey. Nothing else mattered except finding the 5 children and bringing them home safely. HFY Park commanded the main fleet from a destroyer that had been officially decommissioned years earlier. His ship was old and should have been scrapped, but human engineers had rebuilt it with weapons and systems that did not appear in any official records. His tactical decisions would have resulted in court martial under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. The fleet under Jiwan's command moved through Vorthan space like a pack of hunting wolves. They struck without warning at targets that seemed to have no strategic value. Then they would disappear before Vorthan reinforcements could arrive. The pattern made no sense to traditional military thinking, but it was devastatingly effective. Sunjin Lee infiltration teams that penetrated Vorthan facilities that were supposed to be impregnable. His special forces soldiers used techniques that combined years of training with the desperate cunning of people who would do anything to reach stolen children. They moved through enemy territory like ghosts, leaving destruction in their wake. The infiltration teams gathered intelligence that revealed the true scope of Vorthan activities. The aliens had been kidnapping children from other species for years, using them in experiments and psychological studies. The human children were just the latest victims in a program that had been running for decades. Rujin Choi had transformed the intelligence war into something personal. He hunted down every Vorthan officer who might know where the children were being held. His methods would have violated every treaty and law that humans had ever agreed to, but Wujin no longer cared about such things. The intelligence network that Wujin built reached into every corner of Vorthan space. Information flowed to him from sources that included criminal smugglers and even some Vorthan citizens who were disgusted by their government's actions. The network operated outside all official channels and answered only to the mission of finding the children. Donyan Kim worked tirelessly to train new volunteers as they continued to arrive. Every day brought more people who wanted to join the retrieval force. Accountants and farmers and shopkeepers were transformed into soldiers, driven by righteous fury at the thought of stolen children. The training was brutal and fast because there was no time for the normal months of military preparation. Dong Yun taught them everything they needed to know to survive in combat and to contribute to the mission. Most importantly, he taught them to channel their anger into focused determination. King Han spent every waking hour developing countermeasures for Vorthan technology. His research was fueled by the knowledge that his daughter's life might depend on his innovations. He worked with other scientists who had joined the retrieval force to create weapons and equipment that could match alien capabilities. The scientific team led by Kyungmin achieved breakthroughs that should have taken years of research. They reverse-engineered captured Vorthan equipment and developed new technologies that gave human forces advantages they had never possessed. The work was driven by parental desperation rather than academic curiosity. The Galactic Council watched in growing alarm as reports flooded in about human activities throughout Vorthan space. Diplomatic protests were sent to Earth, but they went unanswered. Human government officials claimed they had no knowledge of or control over the retrieval force. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's ability to contain it. The retrieval force operated outside all traditional chains of command and answered to no government or authority. They were accountable only to their own mission and their own conscience. Everthan military commanders began to realize that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Humans seemed immune to casualties and indifferent to losses. They were completely uninterested in negotiation or compromise. They communicated only through violence, and that violence grew more intense with each encounter. Commander Thek 9 found himself dealing with reports that defied everything he understood about warfare. Human forces would attack seemingly worthless targets, while ignoring strategic objectives that any rational military would prioritize. The pattern suggested either incompetence or a completely different way of thinking about conflict. The economic impact on the Vorthan Empire was becoming severe. Trade routes through their territory emptied as merchant ships refused to risk encounters with human forces. Colonies began evacuating as word spread that the humans were coming. Industrial production declined as workers fled from facilities that might become targets, but the psychological effect was even worse. The Vorthan Empire was built on the assumption of technological and military superiority. They had never faced an enemy that simply refused to acknowledge that superiority. The humans treated Vorthan advanced weapons as obstacles to overcome rather than insurmountable barriers. Most disturbing from the Vorthan perspective was the growing evidence that the humans were not operating as a conventional military force. Intercepted communications revealed that the retrieval force was essentially 5 extended families supported by thousands of volunteers who shared their commitment. There was no central government to negotiate with, no rational political objective to satisfy, no economic pressure that could be applied. The humans wanted their children back, and they would keep fighting until they got them or until they were all dead. The hunt had begun, and the Vorthans were learning that they had made enemies of the most dangerous parents in the galaxy. The phone calls came at different times to different places, but they all carried the same terrible message. 5 human children had been taken by alien soldiers, and no one knew where they were. The fathers who received these calls were not ordinary men. They were soldiers, scientists, and warriors who had spent their lives serving humanity. Sergeant Major Dong-Yun Kim was 50 years old and had fought in 3 different wars. His son Min-ho was his pride and joy, the boy who would carry on the family name. When the military officer told him about the alien kidnapping, something broke inside Dong-Yun's chest. He felt like his heart had been ripped out of his body. Colonel Jaewon Park was training new recruits when his aide came running with the emergency message. His daughter, Naeun, was only 7 years old and still believed that her father could protect her from anything in the universe. The thought of her being scared and alone on an alien ship made Jaewon's hands shake with rage. Captain Sung-Jin Lee had been planning to retire from the military next year. He wanted to spend more time with his son Hyun-soo and teach him how to fish and play baseball, but now his boy was gone, taken by creatures that Sung-Jin had never even seen. The peaceful retirement he had dreamed about turned into thoughts of war and revenge. Lieutenant Woojin Choi worked in military intelligence, which meant he knew secrets that most people never learned. He understood how dangerous the galaxy could be and how many alien species saw humans as threats. His son Jaewon was supposed to be safe on the mining colony, far from any danger. Now Woojin realized that nowhere was truly safe. Dr. Kim Min-han was not a soldier at all. He was a scientist who studied alien plants and tried to help human colonies grow food on strange worlds. His daughter Somin loved to draw pictures of the alien flowers he brought home from his research. Now she was gone, and Kim Min felt helpless for the first time in his life. The 5 fathers did not know each other before their children were taken. They lived on different planets and had different jobs and different lives, but grief and anger connected them in ways that nothing else could. They all made the same decision in the first hour after hearing the news. They would not wait for governments or military committees or diplomatic solutions. Dong-Yun made the first phone call to his old friend from the Titan Wars, Master Sergeant Bong-ho, who had served with him for 15 years. Bong-ho listened to the story and said he would be ready to leave in 6 hours. He also said he knew 200 other Marines who would want to help bring the children home. Cho-hwan called his former students from the military academy, officers he had trained to be leaders and fighters. Every single one of them said yes when he asked for help. They did not ask about official permission or military orders. They only asked when and where to meet. Sung-Jin reached out to the Special Forces community, the elite soldiers who did the most dangerous missions in human space. These men and women had worked together in secret operations for years. They trusted each other more than they trusted their own governments. When Sungjin explained what had happened, they began disappearing from their regular duties without explanation. Wu Jin used his intelligence contacts to gather information about the aliens who had taken the children. He also found people who could get weapons and ships and equipment without asking too many questions. The intelligence community had its own rules and its own ways of getting things done. Youngman was different from the others because he was not a military man, but he knew scientists and engineers and researchers throughout human space. When he told them what had happened, they offered their knowledge and their inventions. Many of them had children too, and they understood his pain. Within 24 hours, something impossible was happening across human territory. Soldiers were taking emergency leave for family reasons. Ships were being borrowed for training exercises that did not exist. Weapons were disappearing from storage facilities. Scientists were taking vacations and bringing their experimental equipment with them. The human military command structure began to notice that something was wrong. Thousands of their best people were suddenly unavailable. Experienced officers were not responding to orders. Elite units were reporting equipment failures that made no sense. Intelligence analysts were finding that their sources had gone quiet, but nobody could prove that anything illegal was happening. The soldiers had valid leave papers. The ships had proper maintenance schedules. The weapons had been signed out through correct procedures. Everything looked normal on paper, but everyone knew that something big was being planned. Five fathers found themselves at the center of a growing storm that they could not control. What had started as desperate parents asking friends for help had become something much larger. Men and women throughout human space were volunteering to join a mission that officially did not exist. They called themselves the Retrieval Force because their only goal was to get the children back. They did not care about politics or territory or diplomatic relations. They only wanted to find 5 small humans who had been stolen from their family. Ships began gathering at secret locations that changed every few hours. Supply convoys appeared from nowhere, carrying everything an unofficial military force might need. Retired veterans came out of civilian life with their old equipment and their old skills. Civilian contractors quit their jobs and volunteered their services. The retrieval force grew from hundreds to thousands in just a few days. Nobody was giving orders from the top. Instead, it grew naturally as word spread through networks of friendship and shared service. Every human who had ever worn a uniform understood what the Five Fathers were feeling. Weapons appeared from black market dealers who normally sold to pirates and criminals. But when they heard the story about the stolen children, they offered their best equipment at prices that barely covered costs. Even criminals had lines they would not cross, and stealing children was one of them. Intelligence flowed through channels that bypassed every official network. Smugglers and traders and information brokers who normally demanded high prices shared what they knew for free. The galaxy was full of humans who worked in gray areas of the law, but they all had families they cared about. The Five Fathers met for the first time on a space station in the Outer Rim territories. They looked at each other and saw their own pain reflected back. Dongyun was older and more experienced, but he was just as desperate as the others. Gavon had the highest rank, but rank meant nothing. In this situation, they did not spend time on formal introductions or military protocol. Instead, they focused on the only thing that mattered: finding their children and bringing them home safe. The retrieval force was not like any military organization that had ever existed. It was held together by love and fury rather than discipline and duty. Sungjin showed them intelligence reports that Wujin had gathered about Vorthan military capabilities. The aliens had advanced technology and powerful ships, but they had never faced an enemy like the retrieval force. Kiemmin presented his analysis of Vorthan biology and psychology, trying to understand how their enemies thought. As the meeting continued, more and more volunteers arrived every hour, brought new ships and new people who wanted to help. The space station was not designed to handle so many visitors, but nobody complained about the crowded conditions. They were all there for the same reason. The retrieval force was becoming something that the galaxy had never seen before. It was an army built on parental love and held together by shared determination to protect human children. The Five Fathers realized that they had started something that was now beyond their ability to stop or control, but they did not want to stop it. They wanted to use this incredible force to hunt down the aliens who had taken their children. The Vorthons thought they could threaten human families without consequences. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war was coming, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The morning sun on planet Kepler 442b looked different from Earth's sun. It was bigger and painted the sky in colors of red and orange the 5 human children had never seen Earth, but their parents told them stories about blue skies and white clouds here. Everything was strange and beautiful in its own way. Minho was 12 years old and the oldest of the group. He was tall for his age, with serious dark eyes that missed nothing. His father had taught him to always watch out for danger. Even on this peaceful mining colony, his little sister Neon was only 7, but she was brave and followed her big brother everywhere. When Thunsu was 10 years old and loved to collect things. He had boxes full of strange rocks and pieces of metal that he found around the colony. His best friend Jiwan was the same age, and they spent every day together exploring and finding new treasures. The youngest was Soman, who was 8. She carried a notebook everywhere and drew pictures of all the alien plants and animals they discovered. The children were playing near the crystal formations about half a mile from the main settlement. These crystals were taller than houses, and they sang in the wind, making beautiful music that sounded like bells. The adults said it was safe to play here because nothing dangerous lived in this area. The colony had been here for 3 years and nothing bad had ever happened. Minho was helping Neon climb on one of the smaller crystals when he saw something in the sky. At first, he thought it was just another supply ship coming to bring food and equipment. But these ships looked different. They were silver and moved in perfect formation like a flock of metal birds. Something cold touched Minho's stomach as he watched the ships get closer. He had heard his father and the other soldiers talk about alien ships that looked like this. The Vorthon Empire had ships like these, and the Vorthons were not friends to humans. Neon, get down right now, Minho said in a voice that made his sister stop climbing immediately. She could tell something was wrong by the way he sounded. Yunsu, Jiwan, Soman, come here quickly, Minho called to the other children. They were about 50 feet away looking for special rocks near a group of singing crystals. The silver ships were getting bigger and closer. Minho could see they had weapons on them and strange symbols painted on their sides. He grabbed Naihan's hand and started running toward the other children. We have to get back to the settlement now, he told them when they were all together. Those ships are not from Earth. The children started running toward home, but they were too far away. The silver ships moved faster than anything the children had ever seen. They came down from the sky like falling stars and landed between the children and the safety of the colony. Doors opened on the sides of the ships and soldiers came out. These were not human soldiers. They were tall and thin with silver skin that looked like metal. Their faces were hidden behind masks that had no expression. They moved like machines, not like living things. The alien soldiers carried weapons that looked like long metal sticks with glowing ends. They did not make any sound as they walked toward the children. Their boots made no noise on the ground, and they seemed to float rather than walk. Minho pushed his sister behind him and tried to think of what his father would do. His father was a soldier and had taught him some things about fighting. But Minho was just 12 years old, and these were grown alien warriors with advanced weapons. Stay behind me, he whispered to Neon. When I say run, you run as fast as you can toward those big rocks over there. But before Minho could do anything, one of the alien soldiers pointed his weapon at the children. A bright blue light came out of the weapon and hit Hyunsu. He fell down immediately like he was sleeping, but his eyes were still open. Jawan screamed and tried to wake up his friend, but another soldier shot him with the same blue light. Soman dropped her notebook and started crying, but she also fell down when the blue light hit her. Minho tried to run with Neon, but there were soldiers all around them. The blue light hit him in the back and everything became fuzzy. His legs stopped working and he fell to the ground. He could still see and hear, but he could not move his body. The last thing Minho saw before everything went dark was his little sister falling down beside him. The alien soldiers picked up all 5 children like they were bags of rice and carried them toward their ships. The children were put into metal boxes that looked like coffins but with glass tops so they could see out. The boxes were loaded onto the alien ships and the ships took off from the planet's surface. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. Some of the human adults from the colony had seen what happened. They tried to run and help the children. But the alien soldiers shot them with the blue light too. By the time the adults woke up, the alien ships were already gone. The colony's emergency beacons started sending signals to Earth and to the human military bases on other planets. The message was simple but terrible. 5 human children had been taken by alien soldiers. No one knew where they were going or what the aliens wanted with them on the alien ship. The children woke up in a room with no windows. The walls were metal and everything smelled strange, like chemicals and burning plastic. They were not hurt, but they were scared and confused. Minho was the first to wake up completely. He looked around and saw his sister and friends lying on metal beds. They were all breathing and seemed okay, but they were in some kind of prison cell. "Where are we?" Mei-yan asked when she woke up. Her voice was small and frightened. "I think we are on an alien ship," Minho said, trying to sound brave for his sister. "But don't worry, our parents will come find us." The alien who seemed to be in charge was called Commander Thek-9. He looked at the human children through a screen and was satisfied with the capture. These small humans would be perfect for what the Vorthan Empire needed. The Vorthans had been watching human colonies for months. They knew that humans were expanding into space too quickly and taking planets that the Vorthan Empire wanted. The Galactic Council was not stopping the humans, so the Vorthans decided to take action themselves. Taking human children was the perfect plan. The children could be used to make the human government agree to Vorthan demands. Humans seemed to care very much about their young, so they would do anything to get them back. The Vorthans thought this made humans weak and easy to control. What Commander Thek-9 did not know was that he had just made the biggest mistake in Vorthan history. He did not understand what would happen when human parents learned that their children had been stolen on Earth. 5 fathers received phone calls that would change everything. Sergeant Major Dong-Yun Kim was drinking coffee and reading the news when his phone rang. Colonel Jawan Park was teaching young soldiers how to fight when he got the message. Captain Sunjin Lee was fixing his car when someone came running to tell him Lieutenant Woojin Choi was playing with his dog. When the terrible news reached him, Dr. Kyung-min Han was not a soldier but a scientist who studied alien plants. He was in his laboratory when 2 military officers came to tell him about his daughter. All 5 men heard the same impossible words. Their children had been taken by aliens. The Vorthans had studied human military power. They knew about human weapons and human ships and human battle tactics, but they had never studied what happened when someone threatened a human child. They had never learned about the fury of human parent sin. The next few hours something would begin that would shake the entire galaxy. The 5 fathers would not wait for governments or military commands or diplomatic solutions. They would gather friends and weapons and ships, and they would hunt down the aliens who took their children. War was about to begin, and the Vorthans had no idea what was coming for them.